She was already cold, already broke, already one bad day away from losing everything. So when she took off her only jacket and placed it over a shivering stranger on a frozen sidewalk, she had no idea she had just changed her own life forever. 3 months later, she stood in a crowded hallway, staring at a man in an expensive suit as he announced he was buying her building. And when he turned and looked at her, she realized he wasn't a stranger at all. If you love emotional stories about kindness, sacrifice, and unexpected destiny, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Spoken Pen. And tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from, because your support helps us bring you more stories that truly matter. The wind cut through Chicago like a blade that December morning. Not the poetic kind of cold people write about in holiday cards. This was the kind that found every crack in your clothes, every weak spot in your bones, and reminded you exactly how fragile you were. Lena Morales pulled her thin gray coat tighter around her body as she walked down Maple Street, her breath coming out in small white clouds. The coat wasn't meant for winters like this. It had once belonged to her mother, bought years ago from a thrift store, already worn at the elbows when Lena first got it. Now the lining was thinning, the zipper stuck halfway, and one of the pockets had a hole big enough to lose coins through. But it was all she had. She kept her head down and walked faster, boots crunching over dirty snow and ice. The sun was up, but it offered no warmth, just a pale light that made the city look tired and washed out. Lena was 27 years old and already exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. She lived in a narrow, aging apartment building on Maple Street, the kind with flickering hallway lights and radiators that either didn't work or worked too well. The rent was cheap, which was the only reason she could afford it. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at a diner and evenings cleaning offices downtown, and still every month felt like a math problem she was slowly losing. That morning, she was heading to the diner for the early shift. The sky was still pale and quiet, the city not fully awake yet. A few cars passed. A bus roared by, splashing gray slush onto the curb. And that's when she saw him. He was sitting on the steps of an old closed-down bookstore, his back against the brick wall, his legs pulled in close to his chest. He looked like part of the building at first, just another shape in the city that people learn to ignore. But then he moved. Just a little. A shiver. A small, involuntary tremor that ran through his body. Lena slowed down. She didn't want to. Not because she was cruel, but because stopping always cost something. Time. Money. Emotional energy she didn't feel like she had anymore. She told herself what she always told herself. You can't save everyone. Still, her feet didn't listen. The man looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. His beard was gray and untrimmed, his face raw from the cold. He wore a thin hoodie and jeans that were no match for the weather. His hands were bare, red, and shaking. He wasn't holding a sign. He wasn't calling out to anyone. He was just sitting there trying to make himself small against the cold. People walked past him. A woman in a long coat and boots stepped around him without looking down. A man in a suit talked into his phone and nearly bumped into him, muttering in annoyance. No one stopped. Lena stood there for a moment, her heart beating a little faster, her fingers tightening around the strap of her worn bag. She knew what it was like to be cold in a way that felt personal. She knew what it was like to pretend you were fine because asking for help felt worse. "Hey," she said softly. The man looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. His eyes were a pale blue, tired but alert. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. You okay?" she asked, even though the answer was obvious. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. I will be. That was such a strange answer that she didn't know what to say to it. The wind blew again, sharper this time, and he flinched. Lena hesitated. Then she did something she would replay in her mind 1,000 times later. She reached up, unbuttoned her coat, and slipped it off her shoulders. The cold hit her immediately, biting through her sweater like it wasn't even there. What are you doing? The man asked, confused. She stepped forward and held the coat out to him. You need this more than I do. He stared at it like she had just offered him something priceless. No, I can't take that. You'll freeze. She tried to smile. I'll be okay. My job's warm. You're sitting out here. He shook his head. I'm fine, really. I don't want. Please, she said, more firmly than she meant to. Just take it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly he reached out and took the coat. His hands were so cold she felt it even through the fabric. Thank you, he said quietly. I won't forget this. She shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward. It's just a coat. But the way he looked at her said he didn't believe that at all. What's your name? He asked. Lena. I'm Daniel, he said. Thank you, Lena. She nodded, pulled her bag tighter against her body, and started walking again before she could change her mind. The cold felt brutal now. By the time she reached the diner, her teeth were chattering. The diner smelled like coffee, grease, and burned toast, the same way it always did. The warmth hit her like a wall, and she stood just inside the door for a second, letting feeling return to her fingers. Rough out there. Her coworker Mia called from behind the counter. Yeah, Lena said, forcing a smile. Feels like the city's trying to kill us. Mia laughed. Wouldn't be Chicago if it didn't. Lena tied her apron and got to work, but her mind kept drifting back to the man on the steps, to the way he'd looked at the coat, to the way he'd said he wouldn't forget. She told herself not to think about it. She couldn't afford to give things away. She couldn't afford to be sentimental. But some part of her felt strangely lighter, even as her body stayed cold all day. That night, when she got back to her apartment, the heat was barely working again. She made herself instant noodles, sat on her bed, and wrapped herself in an old blanket. The room was small, just a bed, a tiny table, and a kitchenette that barely counted as one. Her phone buzzed with a reminder from her landlord's office. Rent due in 10 days. She sighed and set the phone down. Another month. Another stretch of numbers that didn't quite add up. She didn't know that 3 months later, she wouldn't be worrying about rent at all. She didn't know that the man with the pale blue eyes and the shaking hands was about to walk back into her life in a way she could never imagine. All she knew was that she was cold, tired, and trying to survive. And somewhere in the city, Daniel was wearing her coat. Winter did not loosen its grip on the city. If anything, it seemed to tighten it. By January, the streets were wrapped in dirty snow and gray slush, and the wind found new ways to sneak under doors and through cracks in windows. Lena learned to layer her clothes, 2 sweaters, sometimes 3, and still some days she couldn't feel her toes by the time she got to work. She never saw Daniel again. Not that week. Not the week after. She passed the old bookstore steps every morning, half expecting to find him there, but the spot stayed empty. Sometimes there were other people sleeping nearby, sometimes not. The city shifted, it's forgotten the way it always did. A small part of her was relieved. Another part of her worried. She told herself she'd done what she could. One coat wouldn't fix a life. One kind moment didn't make her responsible for what came after. Still, every time the wind cut especially sharp, she wondered if he was warm. Life kept pressing in. The diner got busier after the holidays, and Lena's shifts grew longer. People came in complaining about the cold, about traffic, about their lives, and she smiled and refilled their coffee and tried not to think about how every tip mattered. At night, she cleaned offices downtown. Glass buildings with silent hallways and bright lights that stayed on long after the people were gone. Sometimes she stood by the windows and looked down at the city, all those tiny moving headlights, all those lives intersecting without ever really touching. Her building on Maple Street was getting worse. The elevator broke again, which meant climbing 4 flights of narrow, dimly lit stairs every night. The hallway smelled like old paint and something damp. One of the ceiling lights flickered non-stop, casting everything in a tired, sickly yellow. Mrs. Donnelly, who lived across the hall and had been there for 30 years, shook her head one evening when Lena passed her. "They're not fixing anything anymore," she said. "That's never a good sign." "What do you mean?" Lena asked. "Means the owner's getting ready to sell. Or let the place rot. Or both." That night, Lena lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator clank and hiss. Sell. The word sat heavy in her chest. Cheap buildings like this didn't stay cheap forever. And when they changed hands, people like her were usually the first ones pushed out. She checked her bank app the next morning while waiting for the bus. The number was smaller than she wanted it to be. It always was. By February, something else started changing. There were more notices on the walls of the building. Maintenance inspection. Plumbing review. Electrical check. None of it felt routine. Neighbors whispered in the stairwell. People started talking about rent increases, about renovations, about new owners. Lena tried not to listen. She couldn't afford to panic. Panic didn't pay bills. One evening, as she was coming home from her cleaning job, she found a man in a suit standing in the lobby, talking to Mr. Harris, the building manager. Mr. Harris was a tired man with thinning hair and a permanent look of stress. He noticed Lena and gave her a tight smile. "Evening, Lena." "Evening," she said, nodding at the stranger. The man turned and smiled politely. He was in his 40s, maybe clean-cut, confident. The kind of person who looked like he belonged in offices with glass walls and quiet carpets. "Just doing a little inspection," he said. "Nothing to worry about." Lena forced a polite smile and headed for the stairs. But her stomach felt tight. March came with cold rain and gray skies. One morning, a notice appeared taped to every apartment door. "Tenants meeting Friday 6 p.m. lobby." No explanation. No details. Just that. The entire building buzzed with nervous energy for the rest of the week. At the diner, Lena found herself staring out the window between customers, her thoughts miles away. "You're somewhere else today," Mia said, sliding a plate onto the counter. "Just stuff," Lena replied. "Building stuff." Lena looked at her. "How did you know?" Mia shrugged. "You have that 'my rent is about to ruin my life' face." Lena laughed, but it came out thin. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who've had that face," Mia said gently. Friday night, the lobby was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some sitting on the stairs, others leaning against the walls. The air felt tight, heavy with worry. Mr. Harris stood near the front, looking more nervous than usual. Next to him was the man in the suit, and 2 other people Lena didn't recognize. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I'll keep this short." No one laughed. "As of this week," he continued, "the building has been sold." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sold? To who? What does that mean? Are rents going up? Hands went up. Voices overlapped. Mr. Harris raised his hands. Please, please. Let me finish. He gestured to the man in the suit. This is Mr. Blake. He represents the new ownership group. Mr. Blake stepped forward, smiling in a calm, professional way. We're very excited about this property, he said. We see a lot of potential here. Over the next few months, we'll be making some improvements, repairs, renovations, things like that. Does that mean rent's going up? Someone shouted. There it was. Mr. Blake's smile didn't change. Eventually, yes. But not immediately. You'll all receive proper notice. The room exploded with noise. People argued. People complained. Someone cursed. Lena stood there, her heart pounding in her ears. Eventually always came faster than you wanted. She walked back up to her apartment in a fog. Inside, she sat on her bed and stared at the wall. If the rent went up even a little, she was done. There was no extra money, no secret savings, no family she could call. She thought about the coat she'd given away. Not with regret, just with a strange, distant feeling. Like that moment belonged to another version of her. 3 weeks later, another notice appeared. Renovation schedule attached. Please read. Her hand shook a little as she read it. Some units would be remodeled first, then others. Temporary relocations might be required. Rent adjustments would follow. She folded the paper and sat down heavily on the stairs. Mrs. Donnelly sat beside her, sighing. They always say it's improvements, she muttered. Improvements for who? Lena didn't answer. She was thinking about how thin her life felt, how carefully balanced, how one push could send everything falling. That same week downtown, in a glass office building she cleaned at night, Lena noticed something strange. One of the offices had changed. The desk was different. The nameplate was new. D. Carter. She wiped the glass walls, emptying trash cans, not thinking much of it. Until one night she saw someone inside. A man standing by the window, looking out at the city. For a second, something about him felt familiar. But he turned away before she could see his face clearly. She shrugged it off. Chicago was full of strangers. And somewhere else in the city, Daniel stood in front of a mirror in a small, clean apartment, adjusting the collar of a crisp shirt. The coat was folded carefully on a chair behind him. He hadn't forgotten. Not for a single day. Spring tried to arrive, but Chicago didn't make it easy. The snow turned into dirty piles along the sidewalks, and cold rain took its place. The air still smelled like winter, but people walked a little faster, a little lighter, like they were hoping warmth might finally win. Lena was too busy worrying about her building to enjoy any of it. 2 apartments on the second floor were already empty. Their doors were taped shut, plastic sheets covering the frames. Construction noise echoed through the hallways during the day. Drilling, hammering, the sound of things being torn apart and put back together for someone else. Her rent hadn't gone up yet, but everyone knew it was coming. At the diner, customers talked about vacations and weekend plans. Lena listened, nodded, refilled coffee, and counted tips in her head. At night, she cleaned offices and tried not to think about what she'd do if she had to move. She still passed the old bookstore steps every morning. She never saw Daniel. One Tuesday night, while she was mopping the floor in the downtown office building, she noticed the man in the glass office again. He was there later than most people stayed. Always alone. always standing by the window or sitting at his desk with papers spread out in front of him. Something about him kept pulling at her attention. Not in a romantic way. In a why do you feel familiar way. That night, she finished her work a little earlier and pushed her cart past his office. The door was open. He was standing with his back to her, jacket draped over the back of his chair. A familiar gray jacket. Her heart skipped. No, that was impossible. Plenty of people owned gray jackets. Still, she slowed her steps. He turned. For a second, they just stared at each other. His hair was shorter. His beard was trimmed. He looked healthier, stronger. He wore a clean shirt, nice shoes. He looked like someone who belonged in this building. But she knew those eyes. Pale blue. Steady. The kind you didn't forget. Lena, he said uncertainly. Her mop bucket nearly tipped over. Daniel. He smiled. Not the small, tired smile from the steps. A real one. Warm. Almost disbelieving. It is you. She stood there, frozen, her heart racing. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, he said gently. I work here. Cleaning. Oh, he said, glancing at the mop, then back at her. Right. Of course. They both laughed awkwardly. Up close she could see how different he looked. Not just cleaner. More solid. Like someone who wasn't bracing for the next bad thing anymore. You look better, she said before she could stop herself. He nodded. So do you. Still cold, though. She huffed a little. Always. There was a pause. Strange, heavy one. I've been looking for you, he said finally. She blinked. You have. I went back to that street a few times. The diner too. I asked around, but I didn't know your last name. Oh, she said. I thought you'd moved on. I did, he said. Then more quietly. But not in the way you think. He hesitated, then gestured toward the chair. Would you? Do you have a minute? She looked at her cart. At her watch. I'm not really supposed to. I won't get you in trouble, he said quickly. I promise. She studied his face, then nodded and leaned the mop against the wall. He sat on the edge of his desk. She stayed standing, arms folded, still trying to make sense of what she was seeing. I never thanked you properly, he said. You did, she replied. You said thank you. He shook his head. No. I mean, for what it actually meant. She didn't know what to say to that. I was in a bad place, he continued. Not just financially. In my head. In my life. That morning. I was honestly trying to decide if I was done trying. Her chest tightened. And then you showed up, he said. And you gave me your coat like it was nothing. Like I was worth it. She looked away. It was just a coat. He smiled faintly. That coat reminded me I wasn't invisible. Silence stretched between them. So, she said finally, how did you end up here? He took a breath. I had some things to sort out. A business I walked away from years ago. A partner who owed me money. A few mistakes I needed to fix. Took time. But I did. And now you work in whatever this is. She gestured around. He smiled. I own the firm. Her eyes widened. You own it. Yes. She let out a low whistle. That's wow. He chuckled. Yeah. It still feels strange to say. Another pause. Lena, he said more carefully now. Where do you live? She stiffened. Why? No bad reason, he said quickly. I bought an apartment building recently. On Maple Street. Her stomach dropped. Maple Street. Her building. She stared at him. You bought my building? He frowned slightly. You live there? Yes. His expression shifted. Then we need to talk. They talked for a long time that night. About his past. About her jobs. About her building. He told her he'd been homeless by choice for a while, trying to disappear from a life that had gone wrong in ways he didn't want to explain yet. He told her about rebuilding his company, about getting back on his feet. She told him about the diner, the cleaning job, the notices on her door, the fear of getting priced out. He listened. Really listened. I'm not trying to throw people out, he said quietly. I bought that building because it was falling apart, because the previous owner was letting it rot. I want to fix it. And the rent? She asked. He didn't dodge the question. Some of it will go up. It has to. But not for everyone. And not in the way you're afraid of. She studied him. That doesn't mean much without details. You're right, he said. And you deserve details. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Renovations continued, but slower. Notices were rewritten. Meetings were held where people actually got answers. And Lena found herself involved. Daniel asked her questions. About the building. About the tenants. About what they needed. First she thought it was just because he knew her. Then she realized he was actually using her answers. Fixing the heat before redoing the lobby. Repairing the stairs before repainting walls. Offering longer leases to people who needed stability. People noticed. Mrs. Donnelly noticed. You know the new owner? She asked one night, peering at Lena over her glasses. Sort of, Lena said. Mrs. Donnelly snorted. Well, tell him he's doing better than the last one. Lena smiled. One evening after a long meeting, Daniel walked her to the bus stop. The air was warmer now. Spring finally starting to win. You changed my life, he said suddenly. She shook her head. You did that yourself. Maybe, he said. But you reminded me why it was worth doing. They stood there for a moment, the city humming around them. I kept the coat, he added. She laughed. I figured. I want to give it back, he said. But maybe not yet. She met his eyes. Why not? Because, he said softly, it reminds me where I started again. And Lena didn't know it yet, but the hardest part of the story, the part that would test both of them, was still coming. Because fixing buildings was easy. Fixing the past was not. Spring finally arrived the way it always did in Chicago, suddenly and without apology. One week the air was still sharp, and the next trees were pushing out green like they'd been waiting for permission. People started sitting outside again. Windows opened. The city felt like it was remembering how to breathe. Lena should have felt lighter too. In some ways she did. The building was changing. Slowly, carefully, but it was changing. The heat worked better. The stairs didn't creak like they might collapse. The flickering light in the hallway was gone, replaced by something bright and steady. And for the first time in months, she wasn't waking up every day with the same tight knot of fear in her chest. But something else had taken its place. Uncertainty. Daniel was around more now. Not just in the office downtown, but at the building itself. He walked the halls, talked to tenants, asked questions, took notes. People were still cautious, but they were starting to trust him. So was she. And that scared her. They started having coffee together sometimes. Not dates, at least not officially. Just two people talking. About work. About the building. About life. He never pushed. Never asked questions she didn't want to answer. But there were things he didn't talk about. Not really. She knew there were gaps in his story. Years he skimmed over. A partner he mentioned once and never again. A business that had gone wrong in ways that sounded bigger than just bad luck. She told herself it wasn't her business. Still, the silence around it felt loud. One evening, Lena came home to find a folded notice slipped under her door. Not an official one. Not typed. Handwritten. "Can we talk? Daniel." Her stomach twisted. She found him in the lobby, sitting on one of the new benches they'd installed, his phone in his hand, not really looking at it. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up and smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm not in trouble. If that's what you're thinking." "I wasn't," she lied. He stood. "Walk with me." They went outside down the block, to a small park that barely deserved the name. Just a few benches, a tired tree, and a patch of grass trying its best. They sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "There's something I should have told you earlier," he said finally. Her chest tightened. "Okay. When you met me on those steps, I wasn't just broke. I wasn't just tired. I was hiding." "Hiding from what?" He looked at his hands. "From a mess I helped create." She waited. "I had a company," he said. "A big one. We did real estate, investments, development. On paper, everything was clean. But my partner, he likes shortcuts. And I let him take them." "What kind of shortcuts?" "The kind that make money fast," he said quietly, "and ruin people's lives." Lena's throat went dry. "We pushed people out of buildings," he continued. "Raised rents overnight. Used legal tricks to get rid of tenants who couldn't fight back. I told myself it was just business. That I wasn't the one signing the eviction notices." He shook his head. "That's a lie I lived with for a long time." She stared at him. "So why did you leave?" "Because one of those buildings, someone died," he said. The words landed heavy between them. "An older man," Daniel went on. "Heart attack. He was being evicted. Stress, they said. Technically, no one could prove it was our fault. Legally, we were fine. But morally?" Lena asked. He met her eyes. "I wasn't." She felt something cold and sharp twist in her chest. "I walked away," he said. "Left the company. Left the money. Left everything. Thought if I punished myself enough, it would make it right. And living on the street was what? A penance?" she asked, her voice tighter than she meant it to be. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just didn't know how to be the person I used to be anymore." Silence stretched between them. "So now you're back," she said. "Buying buildings again." "Yes," he said. "But this time I'm doing it differently." She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. Another part remembered every notice, every whispered fear in her hallway. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "Because I didn't want you to look at me and see that," he said. "I wanted you to see who I'm trying to be." She stood up. "I need time," she said. "That's fair," he replied softly. The next week was awkward. They still talked, still worked on building issues. But something had shifted. Every time Lena walked past a renovation notice, she wondered. Every time Daniel talked about balancing costs, she heard another meaning underneath. Then one morning she found Mrs. Donnelly crying in the hallway. "What happened?" Lena asked, rushing to her. They're moving me, Mrs. Donnelly said. Temporary, they say. But I've been here 30 years. You think I can just come back like nothing changed? Lena's heart sank. I'll talk to Daniel, she said. She did. That afternoon in his office. I thought we agreed to minimize relocations, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. We did, he said. But the plumbing in her unit is shot. It's not safe. So fix it while she's there. It's not that simple, he replied. Some things take time. She crossed her arms. You promised me this would be different. It is different, he said. But different doesn't mean easy. Or perfect. They stared at each other, frustration thick in the air. For the first time she saw a flash of the man he used to be. Controlled. Calculating. Certain he was right. And it scared her. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the man he said had died. About the tenants he'd pushed out. About how easy it was to become the villain in someone else's story without meaning to. She also thought about the coat. About how she'd given it without thinking. About how simple that moment had been. And how complicated everything felt now. 2 days later, the news broke. A local paper ran a story about Daniel's old company. Former executive returns to real estate. With a controversial past. Talked about the lawsuits. The evictions. The death. It didn't mention his months on the street. It didn't mention the building on Maple Street. But people noticed anyway. Tenants started whispering again. Trust once cracked is hard to rebuild. And Lena realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about whether people could really change. And whether kindness could survive reality. The article spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, copies of the paper were folded under arms at the diner. Someone had taped a photo of Daniel to the bulletin board in the lobby of the building. Not the homeless man from the steps. The businessman. The executive. People read. People talked. And people got scared. Lena felt it the moment she walked into the building after her shift. Conversations stopped when she passed. Mrs. Donnelly looked at her with a mix of worry and something that felt dangerously close to betrayal. You knew, didn't you? Someone asked her in the stairwell. Knew what? Lena replied, though she already did. Who he really is. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. That night, a group of tenants gathered in the lobby. Not an official meeting. Not organized. Just fear pulling people together. He's going to push us out, one man said. They always do. They all promise things, another woman added. Then the rent goes up and suddenly you can't afford your own home. Lena stood near the wall listening, her chest tight. He already did it before, someone said, holding up the newspaper. Look. All eyes turned to her. Is it true? Mrs. Donnelly asked softly. Is he the same man? Lena swallowed. He's not the same person he was. Silence. That's not an answer, someone said. Daniel didn't come to the building that day. Or the next. When Lena finally reached him by phone, his voice sounded tired. I didn't want to make things worse by showing up, he said. They're already worse, she replied. I know. People are scared. They have every right to be. She closed her eyes. So what are you going to do? Exactly what I said I would, he replied. Fix the building. Keep as many people as I can. Do it right this time. And if that's not enough, she asked. There was a pause. Then I'll still do it right, he said quietly. The city got involved. A housing advocacy group showed up one afternoon, handing out flyers talking about tenants' rights. A reporter tried to interview people in front of the building. Someone started a small protest on the sidewalk with handmade signs. Homes not profits. We won't be erased. Lena walked past them on her way to work, her face burning. She didn't know which side she belonged to anymore. Inside, things started to shift faster. 2 more tenants got relocation notices. Temporary, they said. But everyone knew what that usually meant. Mrs. Donnelly packed boxes in her apartment with slow, shaking hands. They say it's just for 6 weeks, she said. But at my age, 6 weeks might as well be forever. Lena helped her fold clothes, her jaw tight. I'll talk to him again, she promised. She did. That night in his office. This is getting out of control, she said. You said this wouldn't happen. I said I'd try to minimize it, he replied. Some of these units aren't safe to live in during construction. So move faster, she shot back. Or change the plan. You can't just snap your fingers and fix a building, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. And you can't just treat people like obstacles, she said. They stared at each other, the space between them heavy with everything unsaid. This is exactly what you used to do, she added quietly. Decide what's necessary, and let other people pay the price. His face hardened. That's not fair. Isn't it? The argument sat between them like a crack in glass. Neither of them knew how to fix it. 2 days later, the worst happened. Mrs. Donnelly collapsed. Not in her apartment. In the lobby. Lena was there when it happened. One moment, Mrs. Donnelly was talking about a box of old photos. The next, she was on the floor gasping, clutching her chest. Someone screamed. Lena dropped to her knees, calling 911, holding her hand, telling her to breathe. The ambulance came. They took her away. The lobby felt hollow after. That night, Lena sat on her bed, shaking. She thought about the man Daniel had told her about, the one who died during an eviction. She thought about how history didn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymed. She didn't go to work the next day. She went to the hospital. Mrs. Donnelly was stable but weak. Stress, the doctor said, didn't help her heart. Lena sat by her bed, guilt heavy in her chest. I don't want to die in a strange place, Mrs. Donnelly whispered. I just want my home. Lena squeezed her hand. I know. That evening, Lena went to see Daniel. Not at the office. At the building. He was in the lobby talking to a contractor. She waited until they were alone. This has to stop, she said. I know, he replied, his voice low. I heard about Mrs. Donnelly. I'm going to cover her hotel. I'll make sure she comes back. That's not enough, Lena said. You're playing with people's lives. Again. He looked at her, pain in his eyes. What do you want me to do? She took a shaky breath. Prove it, she said. Prove you're not that man anymore. Not with words. With something that actually costs you. Silence stretched between them. What? He asked. She met his eyes. Freeze the rents, she said. For everyone. Long-term leases. Real protections. Put it in writing. Make it public. That could cost millions, he said. I know, she replied. That's the point. He looked away. For a long time he didn't say anything. And in that silence, Lena realized something terrifying. This was the moment that would decide who he really was. Daniel didn't answer her right away. They stood in the lobby, the sound of distant traffic drifting in through the glass doors, the building's new lights humming softly overhead. "Freezing the rents," he said finally, repeating the words like he was weighing them. "Long-term protections. Public commitments." "Yes," Lena said. "Not just promises." He ran a hand over his face. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired in the old way. Not the tired of long meetings or late nights. The tired of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. "That building," he said slowly, "is part of a bigger plan. If I do what you're asking, investors will walk. Banks will get nervous. Projects will stall. And people will get to stay in their homes," Lena replied. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "You know this could fail, right?" he said. "I could lose everything I've rebuilt." She nodded. "I know. And if it fails, I won't be able to fix anything. For anyone." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you'll finally know you did the right thing." Silence again. Then he exhaled. "Give me a week," he said. "Let me see what I can do." A week is a long time for people who don't know if they're losing their homes, she replied. "I know," he said. "But it's the fastest I can move without making things worse." She studied his face, then nodded. "Okay. A week." The week felt endless. The building buzzed with rumors. Some people said Daniel was backing out. Others said he was selling everything. A few said the city was getting involved. Lena tried to keep working, but her focus was gone. At the diner, she spilled coffee. At the office building, she missed spots she never missed before. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every argument, every promise. She didn't know if she was about to watch everything fall apart or finally come together. On the 6th day, Daniel called. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Where?" "Your building. Lobby. Tonight." Her stomach twisted. "Okay." The lobby was full when she arrived. Tenants. Mr. Harris. A few people she recognized from the advocacy group. Even a reporter standing near the door with a notepad. Daniel stood near the front. He looked calm. Too calm. He waited until the noise died down. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know there's been a lot of fear. And a lot of anger. Both are fair." People shifted, arms crossed, faces tight. "I'm not here to defend my past," he continued. "You've read about it. Some of it's true. Some of it's worse than what was written." A murmur ran through the room. "But I am here to tell you what I'm doing now." He took a breath. "As of today, rents in this building are frozen for the next 5 years. No increases." The room went very, very quiet. "Every tenant will be offered a long-term lease with guaranteed renewal. As long as you want to stay. Any relocations during renovations will be temporary. In writing, with your right to return protected. And I'm putting this agreement on record with the city." For a second, no one spoke. Then someone whispered, "Is this real?" "Yes," Daniel said. "It's real." Lena felt her knees go weak. He wasn't done. "I'm also setting aside a fund to cover relocation costs, legal help if you need it, and emergency support for anyone in this building who needs it." The reporter's pen flew across the page. Mr. Harris looked like he might cry. People started talking all at once. Questions. Doubts. Cautious hope. Daniel answered them all. Calmly. Directly. Without excuses. Afterward, when the crowd finally thinned, Lena stood there, not sure what to say. He walked over. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it," he replied. She looked at him. "You're really okay with this?" He nodded. "It's going to hurt. Financially. Professionally. But I keep thinking about that man I told you about. The one who died." He swallowed. "I can't change what I did. But I can decide what I do next." She felt something in her chest loosen. Mrs. Donnelly came back 3 weeks later. The building threw a small, awkward, heartfelt welcome back in the lobby. Someone brought cookies. Someone else brought flowers. She hugged Lena and whispered, "Maybe this place will be okay after all." Lena hoped she was right. That night, she and Daniel walked down Maple Street together. The air was warm. Summer was close. "You know," he said, "I kept that coat all this time because it reminded me of who I wanted to be." She smiled. "Maybe it's time you don't need it anymore." He stopped walking. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it's time I give something back." He reached into his bag and pulled out the familiar gray coat, neatly folded. "Take it," he said. She hesitated. "I don't need it anymore." "I know," he replied, "but someone else will." They stood there for a moment, the city moving around them, and for the first time since winter everything felt possible. The story didn't stay inside the building. It never does. By the end of the week it was on local news. Then city blogs. Then a couple of national outlets picked it up. Developer freezes rents. Offers long-term protections after tenant backlash. Some headlines were skeptical. Others were cautiously hopeful. People argued in comment sections. Some called Daniel a hero. Some called it a publicity stunt. Some said it was the bare minimum. Lena read a few of them, then stopped. What mattered wasn't what strangers thought. What mattered was what happened in the hallways. The building felt different. Not perfect. Not magically fixed. But lighter. People started talking again. Sitting on the steps in the evening. Letting their kids ride bikes in the courtyard without looking over their shoulders every 5 seconds. Mr. Harris fixed the broken radio in the laundry room and left it playing soft music. Someone painted over the old graffiti with a simple mural of trees and windows and light. Mrs. Donnelly started baking again. She brought lemon bread to Lena one morning and said, "It's been a long time since I felt like planning for next month." Lena hugged her. Daniel kept his word. The agreements were filed with the city. The fund was set up. The renovation schedule was posted publicly, with clear timelines and clear promises. He showed up. Not just for meetings. For small things. He carried boxes for Mrs. Donnelly. He listened to Mr. Harris complain about the plumbing. He helped a kid from the 3rd floor fix a bike chain. People were still cautious. But trust isn't built in speeches. It's built in mornings and afternoons and ordinary days that don't end in disaster. One evening, Lena found him sitting on the front steps, looking at the street. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking." "Dangerous hobby," she teased. He smiled. "I was thinking about how strange it is. If you hadn't given me that coat, you'd have frozen," she said. "Probably," he admitted. "But more than that, I wouldn't be here." She sat next to him. "You didn't buy this building because of me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I decided how to run it because of you." She didn't know what to say to that. So she just sat there watching the sky turn orange over the rooftops. Not everything was easy. Some investors pulled out. A project across town got delayed. There were meetings that ended with raised voices and slammed doors. One night, Daniel came by the diner late, sat in a booth, and stared at his coffee like it had personally betrayed him. "Bad day?" Lena asked. "Expensive day," he replied. She slid him a slice of pie. "On the house." He laughed. "Careful. You'll spoil me." "Someone has to," she said. They talked about small things. Movies. The weird customer who tried to pay in coins. The way the city smelled after rain. Felt normal. And that felt like a gift. A few months later, the advocacy group invited Daniel to speak at a community housing forum. He almost said no. Then he went. He didn't give a polished speech. He didn't pretend to be a hero. He told the truth. About the mistakes. About the man who died. About the coat. About the building on Maple Street. "I don't get credit for doing what I should have done years ago," he said. "But I do get a choice about what I do next." Lena watched from the back of the room, her throat tight. That winter, when the cold came back, Lena started carrying extra scarves in her bag. Old habit. One night after her shift, she saw a woman sitting on the same steps where she'd met Daniel, shivering, exhausted, trying not to cry. Lena didn't hesitate. She took off her scarf and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. "It's not much," she said, "but it helps." The woman looked up at her like she'd just been thrown a rope in deep water. "Thank you," she whispered. Lena walked home with cold ears and a warm chest. Sometimes kindness comes back as a building. Sometimes it comes back as a second chance. And sometimes it just keeps moving. From one person to the next. The first snow came early that year. Not the dramatic kind that shuts down the city. Just a soft, steady fall that turned streetlights into halos and made everything look gentler than it usually was. Lena noticed it on her way home from work. She stopped for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the flakes melt on her cheeks, and thought about how different this winter felt from the last one. Last winter, she'd been counting coins and worrying about rent and watching her breath turn to fog as she wrapped a stranger in her only warm coat. This winter, the building was warm. The heat worked. The hallways smelled like fresh paint instead of damp dust. And the fear wasn't living in her chest anymore. The building's renovations finished in phases. Slow, careful. Exactly the way Daniel had promised. No one disappeared. No one was temporarily relocated and quietly forgotten. Mrs. Donnelly's apartment got new windows. She complained about the workers tracking dust and then baked them cookies anyway. Mr. Harris finally got his radio mounted properly on the wall and insisted the lobby sounded more alive now. Kids chalked pictures on the sidewalk in front of the building like they were sure they'd be there long enough to see the rain wash them away. Lena watched all of it like someone who still couldn't quite believe a good thing was real until it stayed. Daniel kept getting offers. Bigger projects. Bigger money. Easier paths. He turned some of them down. Not all. But the ones that came with the same old shortcuts. The same quiet cruelty dressed up as efficiency. He let those pass. One night, sitting on the front steps with Lena, he said, "It's strange. I used to measure success by how fast things grew. Now I measure it by how many people get to stay." She smiled. "That's a better math." He laughed. "More complicated, though. Most things that matter are," she said. They never made a big announcement about what they were to each other. They just became part of each other's days. Coffee sometimes. Long walks sometimes. Comfortable silence a lot of the time. He fixed a leaky faucet in her apartment and pretended not to be proud of it. She started bringing him soup when he worked too late and pretended not to notice when he looked a little less tired afterward. It wasn't a movie romance. It was better. It was real. One evening, near the anniversary of the day they'd met, Daniel handed her a small box. "Don't panic," he said quickly. "It's not what you think." She raised an eyebrow. That's never a comforting sentence. Inside the box was the gray coat. Clean. Carefully folded. A small patch sewn on the inside lining. "What's this?" she asked. "I had it fixed," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's warm. And I thought maybe we should stop passing it back and forth." She ran her fingers over the fabric. "I don't need it," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "Neither do I." They looked at each other. "So what do we do with it?" she asked. He smiled. "We keep it ready." A week later they used it. A man near the bus stop. Thin jacket. Red hands. The same look Daniel had worn once. That careful mix of pride and exhaustion. Lena didn't hesitate. She held out the coat. He tried to refuse. She insisted. Daniel stood a few steps back, watching, his chest tight in a way that didn't hurt anymore. As they walked away, Lena slipped her hand into his. "You know," she said, "this all started because I was cold and didn't think too hard about it." He squeezed her hand. Sometimes not thinking too hard is the bravest thing you can do. Spring came again. Just as sudden. Just as determined. Trees bloomed. Windows opened. The city remembered how to breathe. One afternoon, Lena stood in the courtyard of the building, watching kids play, listening to Mrs. Donnelly argue cheerfully with Mr. Harris about whose turn it was to water the plants. Daniel joined her. "Do you ever think about how close this all came to going wrong?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "Do you ever think about how close it came to never happening at all?" He nodded. They stood there, quiet, letting the moment be what it was. Years later, people would tell different versions of the story. Some would say a developer changed because of bad press. Some would say a building was saved by paperwork and policies. Some would never know about a waitress and a coat and a cold set of steps in winter. But Lena would know. Daniel would know. And somewhere out there, someone else would be warm because of a choice that cost almost nothing and changed almost everything. Because sometimes the smallest kindness doesn't just come back to you. Sometimes it comes back as a home, as a second chance, as a life that keeps going just a little better than it would have otherwise. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video so more people can find stories that matter. Subscribe to The Spoken Pen for emotional, powerful stories every week. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what would you have done on that cold night? Because your support doesn't just help this channel grow. It helps these stories reach hearts that might really need them.